Greetings from Wales, the only country in the world that has legislated to protect the interests of future generations and to put into statute the Sustainable Development Goals from the United Nations. My job is to be the guardian of the interests of future generations as the Future Generations Commissioner for Wales. That means that I need to make sure that our government, all of our local institutions such as our local councils, our health boards, are taking into account the needs of future generations. Our legislation sets out a number of requirements for them. They must plan for the long term. They must seek to prevent problems from occurring or getting worse. They must integrate their thinking. They must involve people in the decision-making process, and they must collaborate with each other. The legislation also sets out 7 wellbeing goals, the vision for the Wales that we want, and these link back to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And together, these 2 elements are fundamentally changing the way that we do business here in Wales. Government now needs to demonstrate that they're thinking to the long term, that they're planning for future scenarios. So thinking about the steps that they need to take now to tackle issues like climate change through a low carbon pathway, the steps that they need to take to plan and prepare for an ageing population, the steps that they need to take to prepare for automation and our digital future. But it's not just about those big policy areas, it's about a change in the way that we do things. That's why we're talking about the well-being of future generations, and we're talking about social, economic, environmental and cultural well-being, a requirement to consider all of those aspects. For too long, economy has taken precedent over environmental considerations and often over social considerations too. That's why in large parts of the world we can see the rich getting richer and the poor getting poorer, a focus on GVA and GDP and economic growth at the cost of our planet and at the cost of huge sections of our populations. Our legislation is designed to prevent that happening. It's hugely aspirational, but we need to make sure that that aspiration is put into action, that we have tangible action as a result of the legislation. When the United Nations saw the legislation that we passed in Wales, they said, we hope what Wales is doing today, the world will do tomorrow. But they also said, action more than words is the hope for future generations. And I believe that's the most important part. And as our future generations, as young parliamentarians, you're tasked across the world with perhaps trying to put some of those words into action. You have a hugely important role in doing that, in holding to account our governments across the world to make sure that they are taking the right steps here and now to tackle climate change, not passing on that debt of climate change to future generations. You're in a position to challenge your governments to make sure that they're addressing intergenerational cycles of poverty, that they're challenging the economic status quo to make sure that we have economies that work for everyone, to make sure that our children are educated to best prepare them for jobs for the future, but also to focus on their physical health, their mental health, the things that are going to promote their well-being. My job is to work really closely with those public bodies in Wales to advise and support them on what they need to do to implement the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act, but also to monitor and assess and challenge them to do the right things. Already I've intervened in a number of issues, from how we meet the cost of social care in the future, to how we prepare for automation, to how the government's spending decisions are actually reflecting the needs of future generations and are addressing long-term issues. I think there's a model in Wales that very many other countries could follow. We'd be delighted to share our experiences with you because we think that you have a huge part to play in making sure that future generations across the world are protected, their rights enhanced and their futures are bright.